All right, so now for something completely different. Welcome. I think what you're about to see is more along the lines of the more things change, the more they stay the same. You're going to see a lot of turmoil, a lot of political instability, a lot of continuity from what we've seen in other places that, at some point of their existence, were influenced by colonization or colonialism. So, with that, I'd like to welcome you to the next to last part of Unit 5. Unit 5, Unit 8. Here we go. The search for stability in Latin America. Okay, this is again during the Cold War era. This is during the 20th century. All this is going on when everything we've been discussing in other parts of the world has taken place. Always try and keep that in mind that history is not discrete little moments, and wouldn't be a bad idea when we're finished with this particular one. Um, I don't know how, but well, yeah, I do. Just you can figure out some way of looking at the different parts of the world and seeing the similarities and differences, just to kind of get your head ready for next week, and just for stuff in general. All right, our good friend Teddy. All right, so in the 20th century, Latin American nations faced political instability. They faced economic issues. They faced debt, and they faced what's known as the bully of the North. And that's the United States. They faced the same things most former colonies face. We'll begin in Mexico. They entered the 20th century under the dictator Porfirio Diaz. He allowed foreign investors to control much of the country's resources. So I don't know if this is worse than like the government controlling things, or how this is any different from any of the previous earlier rulers. But this corporatist kind of let other people with money. I mean, that's one way to look at it. If these people have the money to invest in your country, then why not let them? But you run the risk of having your people not benefit from a business standpoint and a social standpoint from these resources themselves. That's always the potential risk. 97% of Mexico's land was owned by 1% of the population. Peasants, as you can imagine, resented this. They saw this land distribution as unfair. This term has been coming up a lot throughout the whole 20th century, this idea of distribution or redistribution of land, of resources. The big thing in today's world is of wealth. And so just keep in mind that what we are talking about is in America or in the world today is not new. It's well over 100, 150 years old. So just kind of remember that. Since I'm responsible for bringing several $billion in foreign investment to my country, I think I should continue in my position until a competent successor is found. In other words, this is the way it's going to be until someone can do it better. And that's what Mr. Diaz believed. Well, there were people in 1910. There was a revolution by Francisco Madero. He defeated the Mexican army. He sent Diaz into exile, and then Madero is elected president. The Principales Batalas. I thought two L's is Y. Batallas. Anyway, somebody tell me tomorrow. And you can see where all the battles took place. Lots of them close to the United States border, which I find interesting. From November 1910 to May 1911. Fascinating. Better to die on your feet than live on your knees. Emiliano Zapata. This leader led a movement to redistribute land to the peasants, and I've heard his name randomly in TV shows and in movies and in various parts of textbooks. The idea of to die fighting, basically die on your feet. Try to redistribute land, not very successful. If there's not justice for the people, let there be no peace for the government. So that's just kind of their motto. And you see a lot of this as well, this mindset, this revolutionary mindset. You have to remember, excuse me. No, this is the 20th century, and we are a century removed from the United States and France having their revolutions. They had all those revolutions in the 19th century, and these people were in Latin America, in Mexico, and then Central and South America were either newly independent or under someone's rule, and so it almost seems like this sort of Enlightenment or revolutionary ideal kind of gets there later, but it gets there when it's able to get there. So instead of looking at it from the standpoint of God, it took them so long, understand that that's just when it works. That's when it gets there, and that's when it has the best likelihood of any modicum of success. There is Zapata and Madero. In the middle there is Victoriano Huerta, who seized power. The U.S. viewed Huerta as a threat to economic interests. And then Madero and Zapata were later assassinated. I don't know by whom. I'm going to assume, since the United States saw the man in the middle as a threat, that the U.S. didn't do it. That probably Senor Huerta did it. In 1917, this is a pretty turbulent decade here for Mexico. In 1917, we supported Venustiano Carranza's overthrow of Huerta. We then seized the port of Veracruz, which is down here. Right. That'd be an easier way to do this. Right there, we seized that port. Yay us. Carranza reached out to the peasants. The Mexican Constitution of 1917 provided universal suffrage. It provided land redistribution, and it provided public education. And again, that's 1917. So that's, I don't know when in 1917, but that's pretty close historically to the Zimmerman telegram. But the idea of universal suffrage of every man, I'm assuming, and I could be wrong, but every man getting the right to vote regardless of land ownership, and now land's going to be redistributed, so maybe some people will have land, and public education. Again, I'm not sure if it's crossing genders, but if it's even all the males in Mexico, that's a market change. Carranza was overthrown in 1920 by Alvaro Obregón. During this revolution, Mexico was politically and economically ruined. There were 1 million killed during the revolution. It's funny. This is making me, not funny, haha, but funny, interesting. Like, I think I now want to, this is so much turnover. I would love to read a Mexican history book translated. And hear how this is covered, but even go and read about this history, because again, when you're looking for reasons why countries struggle to get ahead, political stability is one of the big three. It just is. And when you're continually turning over like this, it's very difficult to be successful. In 1929, at the eve of the Great Depression, the regional caudillos, the military leaders, united. They hope to create stability by uniting in the PRI, the Party of the Institutionalized Revolution. So they're actually trying to come together and coalesce around a common theme, hoping that will provide some stability. The new president, Lázaro Cárdenas, stabilized the country through a socialist-leaning government. So it nationalizes some industries, but again, doesn't fully embrace it. And you see a lot of this. Like, again, these economic systems, whether it be capitalism, socialism, Marxist communism, or full-on communism, it's a spectrum of how much government involvement takes place. They continued to vacillate from socialist policies to capitalism, and it's important to note here that this trend is consistent in the Latin American countries writ large. In the 20th century, they just seem to not quite, they're trying to figure out, and probably not in a which way is the wind blowing kind of approach, but what's going to work, and trying to figure out which one, and then having the courage to ride one out for enough time to see it It's a difficult thing to do, especially when you're trying to build your country, post colonialism. I'm not one of those people, so let me get me out. Oh, okay, I'm not. Oh, okay, I'll pretend. Um, the PRI remained in power until 2000. They relied on, again, the idea of corporatist rule. Again, that, going back to Mussolini, where you the government helps your industry out, gives you a favorable, tax break or wage or access to a particular market, and in return, you provide support either through monetary support or through voter support or through recruiting support. Your business offers support to the political party. So that's what corporatist is. Despite the economic growth under the PRI, Mexico still has high poverty levels, still has high immigration. Actually, boo. Hold on. Immigration to the United States. You immigrate in, you immigrate out. And it has issues with drug cartels, which, again, probably all tie back to this guy right here. Okay. All right. Let's see what my drawings look like on the next slide before I erase them. Oh, I can't because I have a pen. So I'll clear those, go back. All right. Oh, well. It would have been fun. Again, this just shows you the percentage of the Mexican population in poverty. And the further south you go, the darker it is. The middle there is, I believe, Mexico City, which again kind of stands to reason because urban centers tend to have, cities are formed and created historically because that's where work is. And then work dries up and then they can't leave. But the number, let's go back for a second, the number in poverty, like those numbers are staggering. That's greater than 60% of those regions here and here. Greater than 60% are living in poverty. And again, that's relative to how Mexico has defined poverty, but still. In 1959, let's move to another part of the world. In 1959, Fidel Castro, a communist, overthrew dictator Fulgencio Batista. Batista led a brutal regime with deep economic ties to the U.S. It's 59. Cold War is on. We're 14, 15 years into it. We're about to get Kennedy. So it would not surprise me if this government regime was sponsored by the United States, if for no other reason he wasn't communist. The corruption of the government, the brutality of the police, the regime's indifference to the needs of people for education, medical care, housing, social justice, blah, 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 blah. It was an open invitation to revolution. And this happens a lot, too, when the people have no voice and the only thing left is their fists. When you're not heard, you will create a sound to make yourself heard. At the beginning of 59, the United States companies owned about 40% of the Cuban sugar lands, almost all the cattle, 90% of the mines and mineral concessions, 80% of all the utilities, practically all the oil industry, and supplied 2/3 of Cuba's imports. And that's from JFK. So that's how invested the United States is in Cuba. So then think about it. You're not going to want Castro to run Cuba. He's a communist. He's a statist. He's going to take these industries and nationalize them. You're going to lose markets. You're going to lose this cheap revenue stream. So you're not going to want this to occur. And he's a communist, which means he's friends with the Soviet Union, and that gets the Soviet Union a lot closer to the United States. Che Guevara, Fidel Castro. Castro seized all foreign properties, mostly owned by the United States. He eliminated private property. He nationalized the sugar industry. Look at that. I am a psychic. All right. But again, You should see that, and I think, had you had the time and all your notes in front of you, you would have seen that there are trends in these types of economic systems. There are behaviors and patterns that exist. Private property being eliminated, nationalizing industry. Those are communist moves. That's like checklist one, checklist two. That's what you do. In 1961, the United States tried to overthrow Castro in the Bay of Pigs. It failed. It was a miserable, abject, horrible failure. The movie we just finished briefly touched on it. And yeah, it was an awful failure. Our CIA botched it big time. All right. And these are some of the Cuban dissidents who came to the United States and kind of spearheaded this invasion to return Cuba to its former non-Soviet self, to remove Castro. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis was a peak of Cold War tension. It also revealed the political and economic ties that Cuba has to the Soviet Union. And if you remember, and then we spoke of this in class last week, those of you who watched the film, but those of you who didn't, remember back to the Cold War unit and how Nikita Khrushchev seemed to be a pretty moderate a communist leader and somebody who was willing to work with the United States and not be so cold and stoic. He definitely wasn't Stalin. In fact, there was this whole movement of de-Stalinization in the Soviet Union. But whenever things were going well, it's seen in the geopolitical landscape with the United States and the Soviet Union, either we would do something or we'd get involved in something, and then they would respond, or they would do something and get involved in something, and then we would respond. And the Cuban Missile Crisis was a response to the Bay of Pigs and other things. So it's just sort of that going back and forth. We were like right there on the edge of being able to work together, and then we just do something stupid. Like, it'd be interesting to see what would have happened had Kennedy finished at least this term, and then maybe a second. The United States enacted economic sanctions on Cuba. An economic embargo was meant to destroy the economy and topple Castro. That was the attempt. That's the attempt of all embargoes, is to economically starve, or if you're really, really heartless, literally starve a country into behaving. It didn't work. And it didn't work. It just made them more. I mean, look, it has not liberated a Cuban citizen. It made them poorer and less free. We weren't allowed. We can't visit Cuba anymore. The Obama administration has talked about rolling that back, but America hasn't been able to visit Cuba since this time, and we couldn't sell to Cuba. Like we, as in most embargoes and tariffs, we always think about the other guy, and for some reason, I guess we assume that the losses that our country takes, we can make up elsewhere. Castro died in 2016. There's his brother Raul. The Castro family remain in power, but relations with the United States have improved dramatically in recent years. And again, in no small part to the end of the Soviet Union and the end of this phase of the Cold War. I don't think the Cold War is over if you stop and think and look around over the last 20 years. Guatemala, next. In 1944, a reformer, Juan Jose Arevalo, I don't know, I'm sorry. And if you can speak Spanish natively or know how to speak the language, I am profusely apologize in advance. Again, he's elected president. It's 1944. The war is not over. He's seeking land reform. He threatens foreign investments. So again, another leader with leftist / socialist / communist leanings. Okay, right underneath the United States. South of the United States. In 1951, President Jacobo Arbenz hoped to nationalize companies, including the United Fruit Company, which dominated Guatemala's economy. So again, if we nationalize the economy, that revenue goes back to the state. Decreto Numero 900 was a reform measure designed to redistribute land from 1,700 estates to about 500,000 families. The goal of the legislation was to move Guatemala's economy from feudalism into capitalism. So a lot of these countries see this land distribution as a positive thing, like as a step forward for their people. These socialist ideas are not, it's not their old Guatemala. So while we in America at that time period, maybe even today, don't understand it, to them it's progress and moving forward, and you need to appreciate that. The United States supported the fruit company. The Latin American nations supported Arbenz, as you would hope they would, actually. I got bright. That's too dark. There we go. Okay. Operation PB success. In 1954, the United States organized a coup that overthrew him. A 36-year civil war saw Amerindians nearly wiped out due to socialist tendencies, and I'm assuming these tendencies had to do with land redistribution, collectivizing of the farms, and just taking away the farmland. Again, the textbook probably offers more information. I would definitely hit it up and read some more on your own if you have any questions. John Foster Dulles, who represented the United Fruit Company, negotiated the grocery. Okay, anyway. Brazil. Getulio Vargas rose to power in Brazil, established an authoritarian regime inspired by Mussolini. Yes! It is 1929. At the Depression, but again, is a country like Brazil going to feel the Depression like a country like the United States or Germany or England is? Probably not. Is it going to hinder their development? Probably will. But here we go. Vargas' power is based on corporatism again, but eventually embraced socialist policies, including nationalizing industries. So again, going from the, yes, you can own a business, but you're going to do this, and in return, you're going to vote for me, to, no, we're just going to take the resources and the big industries, and they're just going to belong to Brazil. Thanks for coming. Under Kubitschek, Brazil's economy grew dramatically, hoping to achieve 50 years progress in 5. Whew. Now that's a 5-year plan. President João Goulart broke up large estates to promote social equality, extended suffrage, but he had to borrow heavily. And when you borrow, there are loans and there are interests. And if your economy is stagnant, it makes paying those loans more difficult. It means you can't provide things for your people, and typically you don't get reelected. A coup led to military rule in Brazil until the 1980s. This regime oversaw continued economic growth, but was very, very repressive. Sorry, very repressive. I don't want to add an extra very. Humberto Dalanchar, anyway, the new dictator of Brazil, right there. I got that fancy medal going on there. Looks like a Von Trapp. The Constitution of 1988 saw a return of democracy in Brazil. Brazil hosted the Summer Olympics in 2016, and they're still paying for it and paying for it even now. If you remember from the exercise we did, the DBQ exercise, that there's this idea that, well, the idea was that the Olympics should be in like a perpetual host city, and their rationale was because of politics. But if you think about it economically, Olympics don't make money to most countries. They have to spend so much money to put it on, to build facilities, to improve infrastructure. There are probably 5 countries in the world that could pull this off every time. The United States, England, probably Germany, China could, and probably Japan. Because one, we have all the facilities built. We can use professional and college facilities. That puts us at a distinct advantage. Our country is large, so there's enough places to put it. England is smaller, and they have everything built as well, so they could do it. Germany could do it, and they have the rail systems and everything else. So there are certain places where it is not a drain on the economy. But in places like Brazil, yeah, it's great to have it, but then you got to pay for it. And then what do you do with those buildings when you're finished, like the bird nest? Or is that in China? Whoops. In Brazil's constitution, Title I, all power emanates from the people who exercise it through elected representatives or directly under this constitution. So there you go. No more democracy ever. And there's your... Okay, where are we going now? Argentina. Jose Felix Uriburu. That's cool. And then Hipólito. Those names don't look very sad. This deposed socialist leader of Argentina. That's not nice. The socialist-leaning government of Argentina was overthrown by a military coup supporting nationalism, fascism, and socialism. That's nice. So much more hardcore socialism. In 1943, another coup saw Juan Perón come to power in Argentina. That's Evita, Don't Cry For Me, Argentina. That's the guy. And this appealed to nationalist people who were like, yay, Argentina. And he promised modernization. And again, it's 1943. Europe's at war, and America's at war, and everybody's at war, and we are not. And so we should come out okay, and then we can join, at least that's what I think he's thinking. Italian fascism led popular organizations to an effective participation in national life, which had always been denied to the people. Interesting. Before Mussolini's rise to power, the nation was on one hand, and the worker on the other, and the latter had no involvement in the former. In Germany, happened exactly the same phenomenon, meaning an organized state for a perfectly ordered community. I thought that this should be a future political form. So look at this. This man's going to be a fascist. Excellent. Perón, like most personalist leaders in Latin America, exuded great charisma. He remained popular among Argentine workers. So he had that it factor. Women wanted to be with him, and men wanted to be him. It was one of those kind of people. It's like having George Clooney as your president. Perón nationalized banking, the railroads, shipping, and other industries. He supported the Axis powers in World War II. Well, which makes sense because he thought that what Hitler and Mussolini were doing were good things. So it kind of makes sense. Eva Perón, his wife, also known as Evita, came from a lower class, and she implemented programs to assist the poor. When the rich think about the poor, they have poor ideas. That's outstanding. Perón overthrown in the military coup, leading to the Dirty War, in which thousands of political dissidents were killed or disappeared. Remember, a dissident is anybody who speaks out against the government. The Mothers of the Plaza de Mayo marched every week in Buenos Aires for 30 years, protesting government's role in disappeared children. These are the mothers of the disappeared. They exist in Chile as well. You'll hear it again in Chile. U2 wrote a song called "The Mothers of the Disappeared," which deals with this specifically on their 30th anniversary Joshua Tree tour, and on the original Joshua Tree tour, because that's the album the song is on. They had mothers come and sing part of the song with them. It's really kind of cool. Mauricio Macri is the current president of Argentina. He's been there since 1983. There's still some political and economic instability, but at least it's not under military rule anymore. If they can get government stabilized, Argentina might be able to come out of this. I mean, again, big country, you have swaths of poverty, you have all the legacies of colonialism, but they have some industries and they have some things that they can use to help themselves out. Chile. Speaking of Chile, Chile's socialist leader Salvador Allende was overthrown in a military coup. And business interests, foreign companies, and military opposed his policies. Move me out of the way. Of nationalizing the industries and land distribution. He had faith in the people of China. Other men will overcome this dark, bitter moment. Okay, anyway, so long live the workers, long live the people, long live Chile. So he saw this as a call and a cry to help his people. Notice, too, that South America leans left economically, but not so left politically or socially. And I think, and I could be wrong, but you think about these different cultures, the Catholic influence in these countries cannot be understated, especially for the social and the moral and those types of developments. But economically, they're all like statists, it seems. I just find that interesting. Oh, Augusto Pinochet assumed power, supported by the United States, because not a communist, I'll bet. And Allende and thousands of Argentinians were killed and imprisoned. Yay. He shut down Argentinians. No, it should be Chileans. That should be Chileans. Okay. He suffocated politically. He banned trade unions, made Chile his sultanate. His government disappeared. 3,000 opponents were arrested. 30,000, torturing thousands of them. Pinochet's name will forever be linked to the Desaparecidos, the caravan of death, and institutionalized torture. Pinochet ended socialist programs, encouraged foreign investment, and controlled the country until 1990. Let me move me. The first country in the world to make that momentous break with the past, away from socialism and extreme state capitalism toward a more market-oriented structure and policies. It was not Deng Xiaoping's China or Margaret Thatcher's Britain in the late 70s, Ronald Reagan's 80s in the United States in 81, or any other Latin American country. It was Pinochet in 75. Okay, so again, economically nice, politically no. Nicaragua. Well, those bookends tell a story. In 1936, Anastasio Somoza Garcia established a dictatorship in Nicaragua. Somoza family dominated the country for the next 30 plus years. It's good to be the king's family. In 79, the Somozas, who had close ties to the U.S. businesses, were overthrown by the Sandinistas, a group of reform-minded nationalists and communists. Sandinista was also a name of a very convoluted, very all over the place, but really nice album by The Clash. I recommend it. Sandinista leader Daniel Ortega introduced socialist policies, established ties with Cuba and other communist countries. In 1980, the Contras, a counter-revolutionary group supported by the United States, fought the Sandinistas in a bloody civil war. And if maybe you may have heard of the Iran-Contra controversy in the United States. Maybe it'll come up here. We'll see. No. Violeta Chamorro, the president of Nicaragua from 1990 to 97. The Sandinistas handed over power to freely elected President Violeta Chamorro. Nicaragua economy still struggling even then. Go straight to her message. This is the town where my husband was born, she tells them. This is where he learned the values of freedom that cost him his life. This is where he would tell us to make a stand against the Sandinista regime. Nicaragua must win its freedom once again. All across the world, she continues, her voice rising. People like you are burying communism and proclaiming democracy. So set your watches, because this is the hour of democracy and freedom. This is the hour of the people. All right. Daniel Ortega. President from 1985 to 1990, and then since 2007. Interesting. In 1970, liberation theology developed by Catholic priests in Latin America denouncing disparity in rich and the poor and distribution. Okay. An essential clue to understanding of poverty in liberation theology is the distinction between three meanings of the term poverty. Real poverty as an evil, that's something that God does not want. Spiritual poverty in the sense of readiness to do God's will. And solidarity with the poor, along with protest against the conditions under which they suffer. So you can recognize the evil that is poverty, and you can remove the spiritual poverty from your life and from the life of others. But unless you're willing to do the last one, honestly, nothing can be done to affect poverty, in my opinion. It's like a fire triangle. You have to have all three. If you don't have all three, that's a poor triangle. I know. If you don't have all three, then nothing's going to happen. Liberation theology notes Jesus' affinity for the poor. The church must liberate the poor from oppression by getting involved in politics. So this sounds like a really kind of almost like a Catholicism's version of Sharia law, with theology getting into law and the Bible being the book that drives policy. In liberation theology, the way to rational talk of God is located within the broader, more challenging. Okay. Follow Jesus. The radical followers of liberation theology advocate revolution. The Catholic Church has denounced all ties with this movement. So it is seen as a group that is not one with the Catholic Church. But so it's wow, this is kind of neat. This is sort of a split, maybe a stretch, like a Sunni Shia split, but this very much more fundamentalist look of what the word means in trying to overcome the evils of the world. It's one thing to say, okay, yes, I believe. It's another thing to say, no, this is what we're going to do. And I just find this interesting. It's an interesting little piece of history here. This is kind of cool. A lot of words. In less than 3 years, more than 50 priests have been attacked, threatened. 6 are already martyrs, which means they were murdered. If all this has happened to persons who are the most evident representatives of the church, you can guess what happened to the ordinary Christians. There have been threats, arrests, tortures, murders, numbering in the hundreds and thousands. But it's important to note why the church has been persecuted. Not any and every priest has been persecuted. That part of the church has been attacked and persecuted. Okay, in other words, they're being attacked because they're this very last line, that part of the church that has been attacked and persecuted, that put itself on the side of the people and went to the people's defense. Well, that's what the church is supposed to do? I don't know. Anyway. Well, what do you know? 50 slides. And you've seen some of the various changes in various groups and various organizations in Latin America, and the the title of the slides, that desire, that quest for stability, is a pretty right on the mark kind of title, because they're all trying to find it and making away with all the tools that they have, with their religious foundation, their post-colonial foundations, their agricultural foundations, the influences of all the different economic ideologies, political ideologies, because they are former colonized areas, though the colonizers have influenced them. So now they have to make heads or tails of those outside influences and how they fit their cultures. And I think some are handling it better than others, and we'll see how it plays out. So that is Central America. Tomorrow we're going to basically look at how this finishes, and then move on to Unit 9, which is all about just globalism and big things, environmentalism and human rights and economic development and all those types of things. So I'll post this. Have a good night. Get some sleep. If you have any questions, leave them below, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.